Welcome to MTMG's IT Roundtable, where we bring the power of human connections to the tech world. Our experts become part of your team, so whatever tech problem is keeping you up at night, we can help you solve it. Welcome, ladies, today to our second recording of the Women in Tech podcast, and I'm delighted to have you all here. And I think it would be great if we could just start off introducing yourselves. So we'll start with Michelle Pope.
Well, hello, ladies, and thank you for having us, Tara. My name's Michelle Pope. I've been in the technology industry for over 3 decades. Yes, I'm dating myself, of which half of that has been at the C-suite level, which is, I think, relevant to the conversation we're going to be having today, the challenges.
Yes, indeed. And how about Melinda Kinney?
Hi, I've been in hospitality technology for over 30 years. I have played many different roles. I started out as a consultant, and I have done project management work all the way up to a sales executive in a very male-dominated companies and industry.
All right. Thank you, Melinda. And Cait Espe.
Hi, everybody. Nice to talk to you again. My name is Cait Espe, and I've spent the better part of 20 years, I would say, in ops and CS work, primarily in leadership across industries. But I jumped into big, scary tech in 2019 and have had quite a bit of experience both in tenured orgs as well as early stage and to mid-stage startups.
That's great.
Very
and
cool.
Catherine Hemingray.
Hello, thanks for having me. Catherine Hemingray, Chief Insight Officer. A very grand title. So I've been in the industry for 15 years. Prior to that, I was in healthcare. So I was a senior nurse. So I've looked at things from different aspects, looking at a very female-dominated industry coming into tech. And I'm a co-founder, so I put myself in the C-suite all the way up. But the challenges now for us in what I see in the carrier wholesale arena, which is where I am, is about the inclusivity of women within tech and how we can look at trying to penetrate that glass ceiling and need to see how minimal women we can get into C-suite positions.
And as a little insider information, Catherine is also very involved in a program for giving women opportunities in tech and in education. And I don't know if you want to just speak to that for a minute, Catherine, because I really wanted you on the last podcast, and I know you were in the middle of a storm and couldn't. But I'm just in awe of what the work you're doing.
We're very fortunate. About 2 years ago, we reached out to a non-profit organization based in Africa, an organization called Max and Niazat. They look at providing IT skills for people within Africa and skilling them up. We participated with them, and our brief to them was that we wanted some residential courses to be run, but for women-only residential courses. So the residential courses take 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what the course is. And so until our involvement in it, they were open to all, so mixed groups. But because of the location, they were carried out in Ghana. Lots of those places all of the places were predominantly taken by men, on the basis that even if a woman wanted to participate, the social environment wouldn't educate them from being able to sign up. So we were very insistent in that we wanted a women's only course. Right. The organization pushed back initially and said there won't be enough take up. It's foolhardy. We don't think it's any good, and we don't think we should do it. And we said, well, that's what we'd like to do. So can we see? It was oversubscribed by 4 times. And the women who participated, one lady took a bus to get there from Nigeria. I think it took her 3 days. And the messages I had from the women almost brought me to tears, thanking us for making it possible. The fact that it was residential, that it was women only, meant that their families would allow them to participate. And these women are incredibly bright. And that it's been such a success story that there will be another women's only residential course moving forward. And then our engagement with them thereafter is really to give it some microfinance for these women as well. So whether it's a small loan of $500 in order to facilitate them setting up their own business and to develop them, the women are incredible what they've managed to achieve. So we're trying to, as an organization, and myself and my co-founder are looking to try and push that out further and really trying to enable that in countries and regions that they don't see equity. And we're very fortunate, I suppose, in Western culture to have the ability to stand up for ourselves and stand up for our rights. And it's good to be able to empower women in other areas of the world to have that opportunity as well.
Totally agree.
Yes,
That's awesome.
it is great. So I'm sure that we'll be willing to help you out in trying to spread the word. So
Yeah, that's
please.
awesome.
yes. Well, so again, thank you all for being here today. And we agreed ahead of time that this would be a conversation about equity in the boardroom or the C-suite. And I did find a few stats that I wanted to start out with. So this is only 2021 to 2024, which we can break down those numbers. But in NASDAQ 100 organizations, tech firms, 2021 saw 14% of women in the C-suite. 2022 actually jumped up to 17% of women. Then in 2023, it went down to 14%, and it stays stagnant at 14% in 2024. So now I will say I also did some research about numbers globally, and surprising to me, the American numbers are actually about 6 to 10 points higher than globally, which again I found surprising, but I don't know what your thoughts are. So I didn't know if we wanted to jump into some of those numbers and get your reaction on that, or move that way.
So, Melinda, you had some great insight that you thought was impacting the numbers.
Well, just from during COVID, there was such a huge change in the workplace in general. There were some companies that went to more of a remote, and there were some that didn't. And those companies that allowed for some flexibility, especially for people that had young children, daycare, schooling, that was a huge challenge during COVID, at least in the US specifically. I know several families where one or both parents had to make changes when it came to their job just because of some of the challenges that having young kids put forth. And I mean, I think that is probably at least a contributing factor to some of those changes just because of the dates. And I think that as a whole, more recently, we've seen some changes back, but we saw the entire country really move to a lot more flexibility in working remotely and being more conscientious of things that people have going on outside of the office. And some employers really embrace that as an opportunity to better meet their employees' needs. And some companies didn't. And I think in the last several months, we've seen a shift going back the other way to more centralized workforce again, fewer remote employees. I know in a couple different organizations that I'm working very closely with, they have started, new hires have to be in the corporate office, where for 3 or 4 years, that was not the case. So I think that there's a trend going back the other way. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the numbers.
I couldn't agree more. I was fortunate that I worked in a smaller organization, so we allowed our employees to work from home, and we had several single moms that it was really tough for them to maintain their workload during the day. And in any other organization, it would have meant you're not performing and you're out. So we found ways to allow for them to do their work after hours when the children went to sleep. But I had several peers that there was like a switch, and their companies were saying, you need to be back. Well, as a single mom, you can't make that switch very quickly. You have to now find resources to help you with your childcare, pick up, drop off, all of that. And I also saw inequities in, for instance, a lot of organizations have staffing that works outside of the state, and they did that because they were finding key quality staff outside of the state. Well, when the switch happened and you had to be back in the office, those that worked in the state the office was were mandated to come back into the office, but those out-of-state workers could still work remote. Well, that's an inequity, right? And so we saw a lot of that happening as well. And I think it took women who were in that position where they were the person that was the single mother, breadwinner, a bit to get back into the swing of things, and or were laid off, and now you have that gap on your resume as to why you weren't marketable, that you had to explain if you got the call to be interviewed, right? So
true.
It is true. Yeah.
I want to add one other thing. And thank goodness my children were old enough when COVID happened that I didn't have those struggles. But man, I was a single mom, and it was tough, much less with all of the complexities that COVID layered on top of it. And yeah, I mean, kudos to all of those single moms and single dads out there that were having to juggle that with kids during COVID. That was really, really tough.
And Cait, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, when we were talking earlier, when you look at that timeline that Tara just mentioned, we had been out of the pandemic when the spike happened, correct?
Yeah. So what I saw was that in October of 2020, we had over 2 million less women in the workforce than in October of the year prior, right? So that's at the height of COVID. So what I am assuming happened, and I think you're all speaking of this experience, is that we saw a lot of early flexibility and accommodations being made. And I think that what's interesting is I never really thought about adding additional layers to the complexity around like the financial aspect. So when families are having to decide who gets to go out into the workplace and who gets to stay at home and manage the household, you have to start balancing who's going to be making a higher salary, who's got more opportunity, all of these things. And then I think that we saw this height of flexibility and accommodation. And then we saw this kind of at least I felt in my market in Seattle was this urgency around returning to work. And now people are finding a hybrid type of environment where they're requiring folks to be in office, but not all week or something like that. So I think it's really going to be an interesting landscape for us to pay attention to and see how things continue to evolve, because the pandemic certainly changed everything. And I think that this new normal is still evolving as it relates to workforce accommodation and flexibility.
And I think the new normal also has to reflect about retention and recruitment into the industry, because it's all well and good talking about your current workforce. But when we're looking, and certainly the meetings I've been in this week, where we're looking at a dearth, well, we're lacking a dearth of new blood coming into the industry. We have to attract people into the industry, and it's becoming increasingly more global. So providing more flexible working hours, more flexible terms, will increase the retention, increase the recruitment into the industry, and trying to bring more people into a STEM industry. And I think, as you said, it is the majority of those maybe are women, but equally men, single parents who are trying to find the ideal workplace and their flexibility and their work hours in order to accommodate their families, whether it's in-state or, from my perspective, as I'm looking in Europe, about how I can facilitate that to get the right talent into the organisation to support what we're doing. So I think it has lots of different aspects to it, but certainly that retention aspect is really important.
Right. And then retention is important, but also when you're looking at the male versus female roles, there's a huge discrepancy in tenure too. I mean, women that are in the C-suite or board rooms are only there for 1 to 2 years, whereas you see men in those same positions, like when you're looking at the ratios, that have been there 5 to 7 years plus. Like that's sort of the low end of those numbers. And I don't know how we solve that problem, but I think we need to start thinking about it. So
I also think the types of roles and the scope of responsibility that female C-suite has is also a very interesting topic for us, I think, to discuss, because I think that kind of speaks to the broader theme of like tokenism versus progress. And I think we've all probably seen some similar roles and heads of departments that are primarily female versus male. But I spoke to a gal just a few weeks ago for a company that I was engaged with, that she was the head of product, and she was the first female head of product I talked to. And I just ate up that entire conversation. It was such a great call, because I had not had that opportunity before to speak to somebody from that perspective. So I really got to pick her brain.
That seems strange to me, because you'd think head of product, if you're going with the same gender biases where women are the predominant shoppers, you would want your head of product to be female. But clearly, yeah, the boardrooms aren't understanding that, yet they want to throw all these other terms on us. So
Yeah, I mean, and again, in my somewhat limited experience being in tech the last, 6-7 years, she is the first that I've come across, either through other engagements or through my employment. So very interesting.
And I think that's when it plays into active discrimination, where you're, when you're trying to fill those posts, you're actively sourcing out a female to join the C-suite. So we had a CTIO position, and we actively went out and said, we'll have CVs from males, colleagues, but we actively want you to go out and find females. And our recruitment agent said, it's going to be really difficult. It's really impossible to find what you're looking for. And we challenged them and said, well, we don't think it is. So go out and find those people, because we know they're there. And this is a C-suite position, and we want the right person for the job, and we want representation on our board. But it does take a lot of effort and pushing to change that mindset. And at the end of the day, that we did hire a woman, but it was based on merit. It was an active decision to look for a woman, but had she had not been the right person, she wouldn't have got the job. So it was based on merit. And I think that's on us, really, in C-level suite, to really push that agenda when we're looking at who we're hiring. But as you said, Tara, it really depends on who's leading that challenge and who's leading that in the organizations, really.
And so you hear this sweet, very polite Catherine, and then you realize, like, she's a powerhouse behind there.
Yes,
I love
is.
that.
I like it. I like the intentionality around aiming to find a female leader, but really ultimately looking for the right fit for the role. And it just so happened to be a female leader. So I think that you're speaking to challenging some biases, Catherine, as well as an intentionality around what we're looking for and advocating for as peers. Absolutely. And other leaders. So that's really great that you did that. And I also appreciate that that was listened to and heard.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. It's about challenging the norms and making your voice heard for the greater good, really, because if we have that diversity, then it's only going to play better for everybody, and provide that role model for those people coming up within the organization to see there is a career pathway. And certainly when I've sat on some and listening to some panels this week with leaders from people like Digital Realty and Oracle, that's very much what they're trying to do. They're trying to provide those role models within the organization to show that there is a career pathway, and facilitating and empowering those new talent coming through, because we're only as good as where we are at the moment, and having always be a Batman, that you always need a Robin in the wings, and facilitating that growth within your organization, making sure it's representative, I think it will sit very firmly on our shoulders. That's our responsibility to try and grow that blueprint and show them that there is a pathway.
I would just suggest we change our little analogy to Wonder Woman and Batgirl.
That's great. Tara, you mentioned something I wanted to hit on, that you see women in the C-suite lasting 1 to 2 years in an organization where men last longer. I think what it really comes down to is that you might have a seat at the table, but do you have a voice at the table?
Oh.
Right. And I've seen a lot of women get frustrated that they're not being heard. They don't have the influence and that they thought they would have. They're just being told what to do. And you are fitting the bill of having that woman at the table, get frustrated and leave. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I think why those numbers are very different. I was fortunate that early on in my career, I did have a leader that was very inclusive, and we all did have an equal voice. However, it was that 80-20. 80% of the executive leaders were men and 20 were women, but it worked for us. And it's harder as you get up in your career, and harder as we go on in a male-dominated industry. I did a lot of work at the college level with trying to get girls and even high school level interested in technology, and it was just staggering. It felt about getting into technology. It was more of no, I have to go into healthcare, be a nurse, a radiologist. That's up and coming now, right? Which is technology.
Nothing bad
It
about
is tech.
being a
It's a
nurse,
lot of
right?
technology.
Yeah.
Right. So
That's actually what my daughter is exploring, is ultrasound or radiology. So that's very interesting that you bring that up. But yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point, that it speaks to kind of those industry or scope and responsibility bias, either that we hold internally or as an industry more broadly. But I think beyond that, you're bringing up a great point, which I think when you think about women in the workplace, I think you need to think in terms of voice, value, and influence. And all three of those things have to exist in order for it to be an equitable environment for you to be able to participate, collaborate in a really effective way, right? And I have found that to be the case in some workplaces and some not in others. And I don't know, I think it's a big meaty topic for us to discuss. I don't know how we can continue to affect some change and progress in that way. But as a C-suite leader, do you have any recommendations for us? We're talking about once we get in the door, keep the door open. But beyond that, what actionable steps can we do, or can our audience do to facilitate those opportunities, I guess?
I think a lot of that's around education of our male allies, for lack of a better word. You know, we need to have allies within the industry who are committed to having representation, equal representation on that on those boards to show the breadth across. And I think that, as I said earlier, I think that relies on those. But there is a sea change, I think, certainly in the area that I'm involved in with wholesale connectivity, where there is a big push, and finding those allies, finding the allies who are happy to stand up and to raise their hand and to say that they want to see a more representative mix on the boards. And certainly one of the largest fiber providers in Europe has just appointed a woman as the CEO, and that came out yesterday. So there are more and more women within carrier wholesale are seeing those places on the C-suite that are being facilitated by our male allies. So I think there's quite a bit of work to be done there. And certainly having my previous existence being in healthcare, I was quite shocked, and it was interesting when you were saying about it, but I was quite shocked when I came into tech to see it was so male dominated, from working in an environment that was primarily women, and being able to voice your concerns and push forward without feeling that there was a glass ceiling to come into an industry which was so male dominated. I think it was a shock, but equally I'd taken the skills I'd learned from my previous incarnation and started to employ those as well. I'm not wanting to see that there's a barrier there. So
I think you keyed on an important word. It's ally. You have to develop your allies. You can't go in with a competitive, I'm a woman and I can do this better than you. Everybody on that C-suite has strengths and areas of continued improvement. And I think if you can find where your strength helps a peer that happens to be a male, they see the value in working with you, and vice versa. I always go into a room wanting to learn as much from someone else as I'm helping them to learn. And so it's creating those allies and helping to show what value that you bring and how collaborative you want to work with them, and not come in as a powerhouse and try to roll over them.
Right. So, but there is also a little bit of disconnect, though, when you are someone who is firmly rooted in constantly educating yourself and constantly trying to find out what all the bits and pieces are to any problem or process or whatever. And then you're doing your note taking and you're studious. Then I do find that you're put to the back seat and you're like, but I'm like, why does it mean that I still need to learn? Like, we all need to learn. It's not a male female thing. It's just I'm taking notes and doing my thing and trying to like retain information and ask pointed questions, and you're treating me like I don't actually know how it works. But what I'm trying to do is illuminate that you don't actually know how it works.
Oh,
And sometimes I love that.
my favorite thing.
And sometimes you're asking the questions when you know the answer just to keep the conversation going.
Right.
So it's a fine line. You have to be really careful with that. And my feeling about note taking, Tara, you and I talked about this. I once got told in an executive meeting after the fact to stop taking notes because I was being viewed as the executive assistant. But it was the way that I consumed the information.
Right. Like
But all the guys would ask me for my notes after the meeting, right? So yeah, it is a fine balance. And I think that some women can navigate it and understand how to, I hate this term, play the game, and others just don't want to. And they find themselves butting heads and having to make that difficult choice because the man's not going to make the difficult choice. He's rooted in that organization.
How do we change that, though?
Well, I think that, Tara, you're also bringing up, at least in my opinion, what came up for me is thinking that there's different labels for men and women when we are applying the same either behaviors or rhythms, activities, what have you. It's just like when men are viewed as assertive, they're a leader. Whereas if a woman is viewed as assertive, she's aggressive or bossy, right? And so how can we play that game, Michelle, to your point, but doing it in a way that's authentic to our experience while also managing some of the conscious biases that either we have fallen trapped to or our peers and allies and others. So this is part of where my kind of neurodivergent brain goes into overdrive because I feel like I have to be so intentional and aware and cognizant of all of these different layers of things that it feels like almost like you have to be super calculated, maybe not the right word, strategic in your approach at all times. And it's like, when can I just let up and allow my merits and allow who I am as a person to be enough? But maybe that's not an organic experience in a professional environment. Maybe our male counterparts are feeling that same, and I just am not aware. I don't know.
Yeah, but isn't that just fundamentally a difference, Prince? I mean, if regardless of what you're doing and what time of your career you're in, whether you're applying for a job and you don't think that you're good enough for that job, your male ally will apply for the job because they don't tick all the boxes. It doesn't matter. And they have that belief in themselves. So I think it goes all the way back, is to talk to the point that was made earlier about in school and about college and about empowering girls and women to self-worth and how that they have as much right as anybody else to achieve. And it's a mindset change, I think.
I agree. When that Women Are From Venus and Men Are From Mars book came out, I was like, no, that's not true. We're totally the same. Like, we don't need to, this is ridiculous. And I railed against it. And I had like boycotts, bookstores and what have you. And then I realized, oh God, we are a little different. And maybe if I embrace that, I will get further. But I really didn't I never had that. I have a sister. And my dad was in construction, and we both came up the ranks, and we can build a house together. We didn't understand the difference between men and women when we were younger. That just wasn't our household and upbringing. And now in tech, I go, whoa, it's very different.
Yeah. This is a little divergent, I suppose, but I think that it is even more important for women in any executive type role to really make sure that they are taking care of themselves, mind, body, and spirit, even more than our male counterparts. Because if we're not in a good place mentally, emotionally, physically, we are viewed sometimes by our counterparts more harshly. And so I think it does us a lot of good to make sure that we are always investing in ourselves in those various different areas. And it is more of a burden, I think, that we carry, but I think that that investment in the end really, really pays off. And I think that is incredibly important. So I think that education and all of that's fantastic. But I think that another piece of that is also making sure that you are taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, and making sure that you're doing that and never put that aside or sacrifice that, because in the long run, it is incredibly important.
And I think it's important across the board, though. I don't think that's necessarily a female-centric thing. I think that we have different ways of, and we have different weights upon us as women in higher roles in organizations. But and it's sad because part of what my job is as the managing director is making sure that everyone on the team is getting whatever they need for time and energy and all that. And that puts me in the motherly role. And then when mommy gets mad and she wants to punish somebody, then I'm like the B word. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think burnout and taking care of ourselves is a universal need for sure. But I do think that it's interesting to think about women. I do believe at least a few percentage points, I would assume, maybe like 7 to 8%, probably higher rate of burnout in women than men, I think. Probably if I'm making some assumptions or have my own internal bias, it's probably because of that caregiver mentality, as well as some of the roles and responsibilities we play outside of the workplace. And then some of the stress and burden that, again, if we're trying to be all of these things for all of the different people and ourselves as well, both in and outside of the workplace, I think that that's where we become really at risk for burning ourselves out and needing to take those breaks where then we don't get a seat at the table. And then how do you get back after? I think that's also interesting to think about for those that have had to take a step back either from COVID or for other reasons. How can we help support them in the community to get back into the rooms?
One thing I also wanted to touch on that you both have mentioned is taking care of yourself, right? And your mental health, your overall health. I don't know if you've fallen into this or seen this happen, but when a woman does it, she's not stepping up for the job, right? You're taking too much time out to take care of the kids, to take care of yourself, to do other things outside of the workplace. Whereas a man comes in and says, oh, I've got to go pick up my son Bobby from softball. It's like, yeah, great. Yeah, I hope they win, right? So what I found myself doing is not justifying why I was taking time off or where I was. I just stopped talking about it. I'm just not available at 1:00. And nobody could then say, Michelle has a lot of doctor's appointments or Michelle does a lot of things with her children. I'm just not available. And I'd make myself available after hours if they needed me or whatever. And it really changed the view. And I had one woman that I was mentoring on my team. And I said, can you stop just putting it on your calendar, doctor appointment, pick up children, do this. Just block it out that you're not available because you are going to be viewed. And you already are, because my peers were saying, wow, she's out a lot. And I totally switched their perception of her just by saying, stop using your calendar for personal use and just block it that you're not available. So I don't know if you've ever felt that or gone through that, but it's something I feel very adamantly about, is that I'll share what I need to share. The rest you don't need to know. Yeah. So that you don't have to hold something over my head or judge me for it. I don't know if that's good, bad, indifferent, but that's how I felt.
I think it's all of the above, in my opinion, Michelle. For what it's worth, I think that it's unfortunate you have to do that, right? That kind of empathy piece to me is like, I just don't want to have anybody to have to do that, have to justify. I wish that we could all be authentic and understand that we have real responsibilities outside of the workplace. And there does need to be better balance, especially, I can only speak to the U.S. experience, but everything that I've heard is that we're terrible with work-life balance, which I believe, just from traveling abroad. So I think that there's a lot to it, but I think it's really great that you found a strategy that worked to be able to mitigate some of that backlash or even some of your own feelings around how you might be perceived. But I do think it's unfortunate you've had to do that.
Yeah, like it's an actionable item that positive, but it is masking your authenticity. So, that's a hard juggle. But
it's all about
we all do it.
There isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yep. So, and then, I mean, we're off topic, but once you are a woman of a certain age, certain things start happening that are beyond your control, and you're looked at as more vulnerable because you might turn beet red in the middle of a meeting and somebody thinks you've done something wrong or you've made a mistake, and you're like, no, that's called a hot flash, and there's nothing I can do about it.
So, I have one of our board members, a lady called Glenda Brady. She was the MD at Orange UK and Ireland. And during her tenure, before she became the MD, she was chief of staff when she instigated a menopause policy within the organization. And she'd mentioned it to some of my bosses in male. And I think at the time they hadn't really taken into consideration about what she was saying. They said, yeah, fine, go ahead and do it. Anyway, she instigated it. And with their blessing, but nothing really taken into consideration what she was doing. And then they picked the floor with her because they said, how dare you do this and give people time off and such forth. And she went into bat about it. And now it's part and parcel of what they offer. And it's been a huge change, a change within the organisation about recognition of those older women and women that are going through the menopause within the organisation, giving them some time back to take the time that they need in order to operate at a higher level and to come back again once they felt more capable of approaching things. So I think there is a bit of a sea change, but certainly it does need pioneers to go out and to raise the subject and mention it. And obviously now that we see a lot more about male menopause as well, about men suffering through their midlife and how we should adapt it. So I think if we can offer that at the same time as talking about women's menopause, then maybe that would help as well. But, I think it is a very interesting and certainly in Europe, a very talked about discussion at the moment about menopause and how that affects women as a workplace, but in a positive manner.
Well, I love that. Can we get her on the podcast next call?
Yeah, she's great. Yeah, she's really fiery.
So because we've lived in Ireland for a good bit of time, I do think the work-life balance is far more invested in the communities and in the businesses over there. Do you see that in France as well, Catherine? I mean, I know your company, because you're at the helm, probably puts a lot more effort on that, but what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is more of a push to have that work-life balance. I mean, I think it really depends on the people you're working for, what your ambitions are, and how far you want to push forward. I think anecdotally, seeing the younger generation come through are very much more switched on to making sure that they have that time, that maybe people of my age will just spend longer working and trying to achieve things, whereas I think the younger generation turn around and go, no, sorry, it's more important for me to have my time off and I'm going to log off now. So I think there is a general move towards that. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't care how long people work, as long as they get the job done. And some people can be very efficient in a very short period of time. And if the results are there and they've done what they need to do, then great. And I think that's really where I think things are moving to now, certainly within Europe, is trying to make sure that we can see that happening with that work-life balance. But I think it's difficult to try and maintain. And certainly as a leader, as you said, I'm a co-founder, so I will put in the extra hours and I will make sure I'm working. So I'm probably not the best example of good work-life balance. And don't ask my children because they'll say it's rubbish. But
so do as I say, not as I do, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been my mantra, I think, through my whole life. But yeah.
But that does bring us back a little bit more full circle about how women are perceived. And I think sometimes we're just perceived as the token woman in the boardroom or the C-suite and not actually someone who gets the job done. And so how do we promote our results? I don't think that, and this is where I have to eat a lot of crow from what I said for decades ago, but women don't do a great job at promoting themselves. So, and that's a biased statement, I know, but I don't know how
I don't think we're very great self-publicists. I don't think we're the ones, waving our own flag. And men are very good at doing that. So I think we do need to speak up more, do things like this, have podcasts, maybe bring in, not all women, maybe bring in males. We talk about male allies, bring some males in and try and get them to put their point of view across, because It's our perception about how we think we need to change and how we need to educate and inform. But actually, maybe we should be more inclusive and get the men involved in that discussion and say, look, we want to be there. And I think when I speak to men in the C-suite men, they're up having more women in the boardroom because they give a different perspective about things, certainly on a more international basis. So how can we bring them along? We challenge to be our advocates in front of their colleagues in the industry as well. I think it's wrong to be an inclusive group of women or fighting for a just cause. We need to have everybody together, and it's about inclusivity. It's about making sure we're representative, whether it's women, whether it's males, whether it's neurodiversity, whatever gender may be. It needs to be reflective across the board, and I think that's where we should be pushing for. But it needs to be collective.
I would love to have some male counterparts on for future episodes and conversation, because I think it would be interesting to see what their perspective is. From my experience, they're either very aware of some of these conversations and topics we're talking about, and some are very much unaware, and it would be really interesting to try and help them open their eyes a bit. But I was thinking as you were talking, Tara, about what my call to action is for myself out of this episode and what I can do to continue to support and uplift the community. And I think it is just figuring out, if I'm in a room, whose voice am I uplifting in that room? Am I elevating the voice and influence and impact of other female leaders, other leaders who, outside of gender equity? Are we looking at, again, neurodivergence, sexuality, religious preference, political affiliation, all of these different things? I think we want to make sure it's a fair and equitable and inclusive environment for all. So I think that's going to be my promise to myself after this, is really taking stock of who's in those rooms and allowing those opportunities and conversations to take place and being more intentional, I think, with that focus.
Yeah, I agree, because I like to think of myself as being kind of blind when dealing with people, and I don't care what walk of life you're from, like, what do you have to offer? And I just want to see the good in you and what you have to bring to the table. And if we all could be a little bit more that way. And it's hard. It is hard to get rid of the biases, though, because sometimes you see things and you make a, determination in your head, but then you have to step back and say, okay, that wasn't great, what I just did.
I think people are naive if they think they don't have an unconscious bias, because it's inbuilt within us all. But how you acknowledge that is the challenge.
Right. All right. Any other brilliant pieces of wisdom? Come on, Michelle, you've got something to say. I can see it.
No, I was just going to say, how do we continue to be those role models and those mentors to other women in the organization? As we discussed, we see women in other parts of the organization, whether it be customer service, customer success, PMO. How do we get them involved and engaged to want to be women leaders in their organization or somewhere else? How do we continue to mentor and grow? That next round of leadership is important.
Yeah, put the water cooler outside the ladies' room. Good chats.
Right.
But, I do think, like, bringing up more women's voices and seconding what women say and being available to mentor and in a positive way is helpful to everyone. So anything from you, Melinda? Any parting words?
Not really. One of the things for me, the takeaway is that I have been trying to work on getting a women's networking group going. And because of some lots of different personal things that have come up, I have stepped away from that a little bit. But it is an area that I feel very passionate about. And it's something that, just sitting here and talking today, it is just, you get another set of reasons that deserves my time and attention. And it is something that is worth investing in, and I'm excited to get back to.
Great. Well, we're happy to support you in any way we can.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, thank you again for spending this time with me. I know that we all have busy schedules, and to find an hour isn't always easy, but hopefully none of us had to justify the hour to anyone.
Just block it on your calendar.
Just block it on your calendar. I'm telling you.
Block
this
it.
is
Don't
like
tell
what
anybody what
you're
that's
doing.
the takeaway. Block it.
My problem, though, is that I'll block it on my calendar and forget what the heck I was supposed to do.
Well, that's true.
So, but anyway, thank you so much. And we will do all of our little magic editing and get this out. So
Awesome.
thanks and have a great day. And Catherine, enjoy your time in the States. And Michelle, I hope you get to Florida soon, your happy place. And I don't know where Melinda's happy place is and where Cait's happy place is, though.
Usually wherever my dogs are. So
Okay.
Aw.
Aw.
That'll do it.
Yep. And Cait's is where?
Somewhere warm and tropical, but not humid is my happy place. I'm meant to be in a desert, hot heat, but I live in Seattle, Washington, born and raised. So there you go.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks so much, ladies. It was great to chat. Thank you for spending some time with us today. At MTMG, our due north is to help, and today's conversation reminded me why. As women in tech, we navigate so much, but we're not doing it alone. As we wrap this first episode, I'm struck by the power of just showing up for one another. Whether it's a formal program or a quick chat, mentorship is about lifting each other up. Thank you to each and every one of these amazing women who shared today. Your honesty, energy, and leadership are what make this community so special. Here's to building more spaces where women in tech feel seen, heard, and supported.